Welcome back. Last time I built this workshop and this warehouse. Now that spring has arrived, I have 3 goals in mind. First, get more copper. Then, upgrade to bronze. And lastly, go to this area where the prospecting pick found iron and upgrade once again. Before any of that, I need to go panning for copper nuggets so I can make at least 1 pickaxe. Since I am surrounded by sand, this will be easy. However, there is one other block I can pan for items, and that is the bony soil, which I can find at ruins. Now, back in my first video, I said one of my goals was to uncover the lore of this game. I have made close to 0 progress in that regard, outside of asking a few traders about the strangeness of this world. But now that I can dig through the ruins, I should finally learn the secrets of this temporally unstable world. Before any of that, I'm going to remove more dirt from this hill. I haven't decided if I want to flatten it completely or build something up here, but flattening it is the direction I am currently leaning towards. I am now going to place the dirt in the areas where I previously removed sand, especially the areas where the water is now flowing. I could have fixed the water with a bucket, but I want the land to be potentially usable. I also want to gather more sand for panning. I don't know what I can and can't get from bony soil, so if I don't get enough copper, I'm going to need to pan the sand. My first course of action is to check the area for wolves. They tend to wander around the ruins, so I want to make sure I don't get jumped by the furry punks. I also made sure to dig fully under every ruin in case there were any hidden secret rooms. I didn't find any, but I did find lots of bony soil. Turns out, digging out giant ruins takes quite a bit of time. I had returned to base when it got dark, and then got attacked by a wolf on my way back the next day. For some reason, the wolf didn't chase me, but I now had to be extra cautious. I continued to dig and found lots more bony soil. No hidden rooms though. Perhaps one of the other ruins on my map would have secrets buried beneath them. I would have to check them out at a later date. With a large amount of medium fertility soil in my pockets, I decided to expand my farms. I had lots of seeds and lots of animals to feed. I also wanted to make so much food that I wouldn't have to cook for years at a time. Except, of course, to try out new fun recipes like bread or pie. But first, I had a full day of panning ahead of me. Of all the tasks in Vintage Story, panning is probably the one that gets old the fastest. I would compare it to fishing in most other games, minus the need to get any timing correct. The only thing that makes it worthwhile is that sometimes you get something interesting, or even useful, like this candle, or that time I got a temporal gear. On my second day of panning, and on my last block of bony soil, I finally obtained my first lore book. Part of me considered saving it for the next temporal storm, so I could read it while waiting for the world-melting horror to pass. But I instead chose to satisfy my curiosity immediately. The journal mentioned some black filth, which I am imagining as some type of rotting mold, since it is described as spreading without any means of stopping it. I also had to look up what erudition and vacillate means. Erudition means the quality of having or showing great knowledge or learning, which makes sense since the journal was written by a researcher. Vacillate means to alternate or waver between different opinions or actions. I had guessed as much based on the context, but was glad to officially confirm it. According to the text which floated before my eyes on opening the book, this is only part 1 of 5. When I have all 5 parts, I think I will make a video reading and analyzing them in full. I would also like to ask that no one tell me what I will find in the journals and notes I come across. I think it is part of the fun to discover them on my own. So, if you feel you must say something, I request you lie to me. Make up some plausible nonsense so I will not know what to believe. This has worked for others, so I imagine it will work well for me. I am also curious to learn how wild your imaginations can be. So, dear spirits and souls of the internet, please lie to me in regards to the lore books of this game. I will very much appreciate it. Having exhausted the last of my bony soil, I proceeded to distribute the collected items into my storage. I also took the opportunity to rearrange my storage. I would likely do this again once I had enough copper for nails and several chests, but this would do for now. I decided to lay the raw hides on the ground in hopes they would rot and decay faster. I had more than I needed, and the extras would only be good for compost. I returned to the water and prepared the sand for panning. The bony soil had yielded no copper, and so I could only rely on the sand. Out of curiosity, I had placed the sand on a block of ice, which eventually melted. In the growing darkness, the half-panned sand fell to the bottom of the water, where I could no longer pan it, and breaking it only wiped it from existence. A shame, really. Once the sun rose, I returned to panning, this time placing the sand on solid ground. A shiver launched itself at me, and my heart leapt into my throat. I quickly drew my spear to fight back, surprised I had taken so little damage, especially because I was not wearing armor. The creature defeated, I returned to my panning. It didn't take long before I had enough copper for a new pickaxe. I knew of at least 2 locations that would have copper to mine, and considering it spawns in veins, it was likely there would be more nearby. While the copper slowly turned molten, I grabbed my scythe and began clearing grass from the area around my warehouse. As I did, another shiver attacked, and I dealt with it accordingly. I did not see where it came from, but I was willing to bet my warehouse, being both a large structure and not well lit, was the source. I continued scything my lawn, both to make it look nicer and because I knew I would eventually need lots of grass. The land cleared, I returned to check on the molten copper, only to find it would not pour from the crucible. I had waited too long, and it had solidified. I had to heat it again before I could pour it into the mold. While I waited for the pickaxe to cool, I checked on my rawhide collection. The raw hides were getting closer to being useful, but they still needed a day. They would also likely rot just as quickly in my inventory, so I picked them up. I would have checked on my chickens, except an angry temporal rift was blocking the way. So I decided to relocate my collection of cattails instead. They were currently in an area where I wanted to build, so they would have to be moved somewhere less obstructing. That area was inconveniently covered in raised dirt. I needed the land to be flat, so I began shoveling away. I then planted the cattails, which were fewer than expected. The nearby peat, however, was a great deal more than expected, so I began gathering it for use in the pit kilns when I once again would need to fire clay items. My peat collecting was rudely interrupted, and by the time I dealt with the problem, it was too dark to continue. Back in my cozy little house, I made a new basket for the specific purpose of allowing items to rot so I could turn them into compost. Come morning, I began stacking the peat I had collected against the side of my house. I probably wouldn't keep it there, but it would do for now. I then collected more peat and stacked it with the rest. At this point, my new pickaxe was finally done. I could now go mining for more copper. Instead, I hung it on the wall and started an entirely different project. The watery area, which once held cattails, was filled with dirt. I then dug into that dirt to make a decent-sized pit. I made the pit even bigger by using more dirt to raise the walls and cover it with a ceiling that would be level with the platform where my workshop sat. This hole in the ground was going to be an absurdly large coal pit. I made sure to include stairs into the pit so I could easily fill it with firewood, and left a single open hole at the far end for lighting it. All I needed now was a ludicrous amount of firewood. The trees I had planted the year before had finally grown, so I began chopping and chopping and chopping. The amount of firewood I got hardly filled a single corner of the pit. It seemed I would need a great deal more wood than anticipated. In searching for an area to deforest, I came across a couple pear trees marked on my map. They were still dormant, but showed clear signs that they would bear fruit this year. My own little grove of fruit trees was still too young, but at least I would be able to harvest these wild trees. I looked forward to the pies I would make once they were ready. More importantly, I needed a small forest worth of logs to fill my coal pit. To my surprise, I found bees, and this time I did not accidentally chop down the tree. Better yet, it was a large hive. I immediately opened the handbook to find out how to capture these little yellow pixels. I also marked my map and deleted a previous bees marker, which did not have any bees. I then returned to my base to read up on beekeeping. According to my handy fancy notebook, I would need skeps, lots of flowers, and a straw dummy. I wasn't sure how many flowers I would need, so I assumed I would need as many as I could find. The straw dummy was easy enough, and the skeps just needed a lot of cattails. Unfortunately, a rift had just spit out a shiver near my cattail farm. Fortunately, there were plenty of wild cattails nearby. I made several skeps, collected every flower I could see, and returned to the bees. I placed the skep in the flowers and checked the hive. For some reason, the flowers were not registering. Thinking it was the wrong type of flower, I tried a different type. Still nothing, so I planted more. Finally, the hive recognized the flowers. I removed a few to test something, and the hive did not immediately notice they were gone. It seems there was a delay when it came to hives and flowers. It also seemed I would have to wait 4 days for the bees to swarm to the skep. Very well, I still had a coal pit to fill and copper to mine. I also had a temporal storm to sit through. While my walls melted, I looked up how to make bookshelves. Perhaps I would include a library when I expanded the house. I intended to at least add a kitchen, and having a library seemed like an excellent idea. Once time had stabilized, I decided to check on my chickens and pigs. I then noticed a very unwelcome visitor in my barn. The trespasser was stabbed on sight, and I proceeded to check on my pigs. I had plenty and also needed more food, so I picked the oldest and most underfed swine and made myself a hearty meal. I then began to redesign my animal pens. I wanted a new entrance closer to my house, and a pathway to the place I planned to house the apiary once I had successfully domesticated the bees. This meant dividing the pig pen into 2 separate areas, which would ultimately be a good thing, since it would potentially make it easier to separate the different pig generations. In the meanwhile, I laid down a bunch of dirt. After the various bear and wolf attacks, I was fairly certain the fences would keep out unwanted predators. So I built the apiary platform 1 block lower than the livestock area. I surrounded it in a fence, added a border of tall flowers, and placed fence posts for the skeps, and then filled the rest of the area with every flower in my pocket. The apiary was ready to receive the bees, but since the bees weren't ready yet, I returned to my acts of mass deforestation. I managed to almost fill one wall of the coal pit, plus some of the floor. I traveled further away for more logs and collected some additional crop seeds while I was at it. On returning from my adventure, I found more native copper. Back at my base, I planted the tree seeds I had collected, since I would most definitely need them, and hurried to fill my belly while I took damage from hunger. The hides had finally turned to rot, so I filled the barrel and sealed it shut. I decided to make a few more barrels so I would have even more compost. Some of my crops had finally matured, so I harvested them, replanted what I could, and fed my pigs for the first time since the start of winter. At this point, it was very dark, so I slept the night away. In the morning, I turned the logs into firewood and added it to the coal pit. It finally felt like I was making progress. I couldn't wait to set it all ablaze. At this point, I needed a break from all the tree chopping, so I fought another shiver and dug out a new addition to my pig pen. I vaguely remembered that piglets are small enough to fall through a half-block space, which meant you could create slits in the ground as a means of separating one generation for the next. I don't know if this was true, but I was willing to try it. I then harvested more crops before heading out to collect copper in the areas I had marked on my map. Thankfully, it didn't take long to find the veins. At last, I could make more tools and finish the copper nails I had started so long ago. I had to reheat the nails and then heat a new copper ingot. I used a heavy hit to spread the hot metal faster, and then shaped and chipped it pixel by pixel. I wasted no time using the hot nails and some wooden boards to make my first chests. At long last, I could start moving my resources into the warehouse. Of course, 2 chests wasn't nearly enough, but it was a good start. I would also need some crates for the large amounts of wood and stone I would be gathering. Even better, the bees had finally swarmed, so I picked up the full skep and brought it home to the apiary. I wondered how long it would take for all 8 of my skeps to be full of bees. The only downside was I would have to break the skeps each time I wanted honey, which meant I would need to keep making more skeps, or at least I would for however long I needed to harvest the honey and wax. So I gathered more cattails and was pleasantly surprised to find out the bees had already spread to the other skeps. It seemed they swarmed much faster once domesticated. I decided to make the apiary nicer by adding a path. I also remembered I had fruit tree cuttings to check on. Sadly, 2 of them had died and only 1 had taken root and flowered. The rest were still deciding if they wanted to exist. I forgot to record moving all my peat into a crate, so let's jump to when I grabbed my mining tools and set out. I didn't go very far before deciding to take a sample from the cave beneath my base. Emerald was the most promising reading, but my main goal was to find more copper and some tin. I stopped briefly to examine the pink apple tree. It was flowering and would continue to flower for another couple days, which meant it would be a while before I had harvest-ready fruit. I took another prospecting reading from below the ruins, since I had already dug those up and exposed most of the stone below. I'd love to find some zinc and bismuth to make bismuth bronze, but with the readings I was getting, it looked like tin bronze was my best bet. So, cassiterite it was. It helped that I found a very high cassiterite reading right away. I implemented my spiral down strategy and got a medium amounts reading without having to branch out first. Then it was just a bit of checking 6 blocks to the front, sides, and back until I got a large amounts reading. I dug forward until the reading dropped to medium and doubled back to dig down. After finding nothing, I tried digging up and found it immediately. After breaking chunks into nuggets, I counted out enough copper and tin for some bronze tools and a couple ingots. While the molten bronze formed, I fought another shiver and fixed a few gaps in the walls around my base. I then checked on my bees and found that every skep was populated, and one of them was even ready to harvest. I checked the handbook and it confirmed I had to break the skep to get the honey. There was also a chance the bees would get angry and attack, but they didn't. I would need a new skep for the apiary and a few backups. But first I had hot molten bronze which needed to be poured into clay molds. I also didn't have enough cattails to make more skeps, so I grabbed my scythe and started gathering. My goal was to have enough for 9 skeps, 1 to replace the skep I broke, and 8 backups. I would also need enough for a basket to store them. I then took a small break to check on my fruit trees. 3 more had taken root and bloomed, but 4 had chosen to become firewood. Only 1 remained undecided. I returned to gathering cattails, and when I had enough, I replaced the broken skep, added many more flowers, and then placed a basket, which I filled with backup skeps. I wondered if it might be more efficient to fill it with clay and cattails, especially since yet another skep was already full of honey. This time, the bees were furious and immediately attacked the straw dummy before hovering over the nearby water in confusion. It'd be nice if there was a bee box upgrade, which would allow the removal of honey without harming the skep and angering the bees. I know real-life bee boxes are just wooden boxes with slotted frames that can be removed without hurting the bees or the hive. It'd be nice to have that option in the game. By now, my bronze items had cooled and were ready for use. I hung the shiny new tools on the wall and placed the ingots in the chest. I then went into my food cellar to squeeze the honey from the honeycomb and into a bucket. I knew the wax could be used for candles, sealing pots, cheese, and all sorts of other things. As for the honey, it could be put on porridge or drunk as is. The last thing I decided to do was chop down more trees. I stacked a bunch of firewood in my house for cooking and put the rest in the coal pit. I was nowhere near close. At best, I had filled half of it. Still, I had made a good bit of progress. I looked forward to next time when I would finally fill the coal pit to the brim and then mine a whole ton of iron. Thank you for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the video, and take care of yourself.